Good morning. My name is Steve Reed, and welcome to Mental Health Monday, the place where we take bite-sized pieces of emotional, mental, and spiritual awareness and seek to understand them, to grow in awareness, because awareness can lead to movement, and movement can lead to freedom, and it is for freedom that Christ set us free. So I'm going to take just a couple seconds here, a minute and a half or so, and just talk about where we are going into the future with Mental Health Monday. I wasn't really sure how this would be received, and quite frankly, I thought this was going to be something that during COVID being isolated, this would serve a number of people, but probably that would be its duration. As we have asked people what are the most helpful things that we've offered as a church, this is one of the things that they would like to see continue. So if you're one of those people, thank you for tuning in, and I'm glad this feels helpful because it's helpful for me. Over the next few months, so this month, June, the theme will be journaling. If you're not a journaler, that's okay. And the things that we'll talk about hopefully will, so there's journalers that are that nope, there's journalers that are the curious, and there's journalers that are the habitual. And if you're a nope, I hope to move you to curious, and if you're curious, perhaps you'll move to consistent. And so June will be for journaling. July will be for freedom. We're going to be looking at freedom from a number of different things, including addictions and besetting habits and things like that. August is going to be about angst, all of those disruptive things, and how do we deal with disruptive things. And September will be about story. So I'm looking forward to those pieces. Today we're going to be looking at journaling from a specific perspective. We're going to look at two early studies. Believe it or not, not all the time and forever has everybody just thought, oh, journaling is the best thing around. And there were some studies that were done, and a couple authors have gotten together and written a couple books, and it's helpful to just kind of know what some of that early studies showed. So one of the things that I think about is with journaling, there's this guy who founded a ministry. His name is Dawson Trotman. He founded the Navigators Ministry. And one of his quotes I love, and I've loved it for a long, long time, he says, our thoughts disentangle themselves when they flow through the lips and through the fingertips. And so this is a piece of that. So journaling is a piece of our thoughts flowing through the fingertips. So James Pennebaker is a researcher and an author, and he, a number of years ago, was doing some studies in his graduate work, and he needed to publish something, and he thought, well, nothing's been done about writing, so let's just try to figure this out. And so he and a team got together, a group of students, and they had them do this kind of study. Okay, so for 15 minutes, for 4 days in a row, just write whatever's there. He called it free writing. And so 4 days in a row, 15 minutes, and he's pretty open as he talks about it. He says 15 minutes wasn't magic. 15 minutes was because we only had a certain number of hour slots, and we had to break them up somehow, so we broke them up into 15-minute slots. And so there wasn't anything magical about the 15 minutes. Actually, the practice most of the time these days from practitioners is more like 20 minutes. But in the study, it was 15 minutes, and they found some very interesting things. Number one, they found out that, so they asked people what they were, a series of questions before they did it, while they were doing it, and then after they were doing it, and then following up even 6 weeks later. And so what they discovered was that soon after doing that journaling, there was an increase in sadness and in anxiety, kind of at the level you would experience if you just finished watching a sad movie. Okay, so there is that. There is some actual disruption. In addition to that, it was very interesting that there was a long-term drop in health issues. They showed up at the health center only half as frequently as those who did not do the journaling exercise. And there was an overall increase in a sense of value and meaning of those disruptive things that they journaled about. And so it's very interesting that they broke them into a few different groups, and one of the groups was just writing facts and no feelings. One of them was just writing emotions, venting, and no thoughts. And one of them was working on both of them. Interesting that the one that had just the facts, there was no significant benefit. The one that had just the emotion, no significant benefit. The one that included both, there were significant benefits. And so that's the increase of insight, the increase of meaning and value came from that third group. So it's just helpful to understand that just putting things on paper isn't necessarily the best practice. And so it's helpful to know that. A second study, so the first one was called free writing, the second one would be called expressive writing. And for this one, it was a different researcher, and he actually came more from a medical approach even. He drew blood before, during, and after, and analyzed white blood cell count and T lymphocytes and a number of things that have to do with our immune response. And his results were almost identical to the first one, but he drew some additional conclusions to it. It's always good if you're doing an experiment or a study and it's repeatable. And so the second study says, okay, so there's really something here. It wasn't just aberrant, something weird that happened in that first study. The second study had much the same results. They drew the blood, and they were specifically measuring T lymphocytes. And T lymphocytes are the kind of white blood cells that stimulate other white blood cells to increase antibodies. And so the people who wrote about their deepest thoughts and feelings about traumatic experiences evidenced enhanced immune function. They actually grew healthier in their immune function. They had that immune function increase was still present 6 weeks later. So this is perhaps one of those reasons why there were fewer visits to the health center from the first study. And they actually noticed that in this study too, fewer visits to the health center. And so it's interesting that these two studies together help us understand that there are things that are helpful about putting those thoughts out there, letting our thoughts disentangle themselves as they flow through our lips and through our fingertips. And through our fingertips in journaling is actually helpful. So one of the things that they moved on to is recognizing that if there is some kind of communication about what's going on inside, and you could put that in the confession category, if you put our emotions into words, it makes an immediate change in brain activity. If I'm feeling very, very disrupted, most of my brain activity is back in that amygdala area. As soon as I start putting that disruption into words, it activates my right prefrontal cortex. And as I'm activating my right prefrontal cortex, that's where insight and connections and understanding can happen. It doesn't happen back in the amygdala. It doesn't have the capability of making those kinds of connections. And so just journaling actually changes the places in the brain that are activated, especially if it's journaling about disruptive things and not just trying to pour it out, but also asking questions like why and what does this lead to. So one of the things that is interesting then is this whole concept of venting, right? So venting is something that we want to be able to have that friend that we can just vent to. And I'm not saying never do that, but from the study's perspective, it doesn't actually increase my ability to handle life to vent. It might feel relieving, but it doesn't actually change my ability to do life better. What changes my ability to do life better is if I vent and then give the person I'm venting to the opportunity to speak into that or to ask gentle, curious questions. Why do you think that is so disruptive to you? And what is this? What are the echoes of this feeling like in other places in your heart's story. And so it's just helpful to kind of recognize that our insight increases, and so does our ability to make sense of our experiences when we're able to put both into practice. They measured the T lymphocytes, they measured brain activity, they measured blood pressure, which actually decreased afterwards, they measured heart rate, which decreased afterwards, and they measured skin conductivity, which actually increased, which meant that there was a little bit more awareness of things, and there was an increase of immune response. And so it's really just helpful to kind of recognize that journaling is a tool that can be used for a purpose, and that if you're one of those that is a consistent journaler, great. If you're one of those that is a curious journaler, I sometimes wonder about this journaling thing, but I've never really got into it. Well, great. I'm going to give you a practice in just a second that hopefully you can use, if you choose to start and kind of jumpstart that curiosity. If you're a nope, I don't ever want to journal, I've tried it and I threw it away, I want to suggest to you to do something where I started in journaling, which was I call situational journaling. Something happens. This week was a situation-filled week. A deep, good friend of our family passed away this week, and there's great sadness with that. And it's worth taking time to process through what all of that is. There's a significant amount of disruption with significant injustice that our whole society feels that has happened. And being able to process through, how do I feel about that injustice, and how do I feel about what's happening as a result of that injustice? Those are things that are helpful for us to process through. And so if you are a nope, I want to invite you to move to a curious and a situational. And so if there's a situation that comes up that feels disruptive, I want to encourage you to do this. Consider for 4 days taking 20 minutes a day and journaling specifically about that disruption, and not just venting, not just pouring out the emotion, but also pouring out the emotion and wondering, where does this come from? What does this mean? How do I navigate this? All of those kinds of pieces that might increase insight. Where are other places that I felt like this in my story? And after that 20 minutes, I want to invite you to take 10 minutes of purposeful self-care. That purposeful self-care can look all kinds of ways, right? It could be 10 minutes of walking and listening to music. It could be worship music and a bubble bath. It could be solitude and scripture. I mean, there's not like the right thing to do. You can practice gratitude on a 10-minute walk. Lots of different things are helpful to encourage our brain, our heart, our spirit to move into hope, to move into connectedness, to move into love in a purposeful way. I decided for 20 minutes to move into disruption. I can decide to be kind to my heart, my head, my soul by moving into things that I know that are going to be good self-care. And so decide on that 10 minutes what I'm going to do before you start the 20 minutes. And so just kind of I invite you to do that and explore what that's like. As you do that, just know that some of these things, whether you can put your finger on it or not, your brain is moving in activation from the amygdala into that right prefrontal cortex. Your heart rate might increase while you're journaling, but it will decrease long-term overall. Your T lymphocytes are going into production to increase your antibodies and your immune response. And so there is health and freedom as we move into those things. So I wish you a great week. It's good to be with you. Thanks so much.